It is great to be with all of you. And so what we really want to talk to you about is, as Bill would say, all the shit we told you that is false, as to lifelong consultants. So,
and PhDs.
And PhD. Well, yeah, PhD can stand for a lot of things. Anyhow, so we've talked a lot today about the headwinds we're all facing. And we've talked about the solutions around those headwinds. We've talked about AI. We've talked about managers and what they're faced with. We've talked about culture. We've talked about, how difficult cultures and, everything today. And what we want to do is reiterate that, but talk about leadership. What is the role of the leader? Because fundamentally, the role of leadership has changed. And we have different expectations from employee groups. We have different expectations from leadership. And we have the pressures of what's happening in the world. So we've heard this before. In the last 5 years, we've seen a global pandemic. We've seen Brexit. We've seen political instability and insurrection. We've seen mental health on the rise. We've seen a reckoning with racial injustice and certainly gender equality. And we've seen climate change. All are on the tops of our minds, and they're exhausting. And we've certainly seen this because we've literally brought work into our homes. And no longer can we look at employees through one lens. They are dealing with sociopolitical, economic conditions, and we as leaders have a role in understanding the context in which our employees live and work, and the pressure of that, whether they're at home or coming into the office. So, strong leadership is needed more than ever. As I said, we are faced with all of these global realities and these tensions. We are really looking at what is the role of the CEO? What is the role of the senior leadership team? No longer are senior leaders or CEOs just shareholder stewards, but rather stakeholder stewards. And I really want to get away from that triteness around that term. We did a study of over 600 CEOs globally. All of them said that they do not have these traits and that they need to establish them quickly and they don't know how. Trust, transparency, and compassion. We also know that they are faced with technological change like we've never seen before and global instability like we've never seen before. And they say, 100% of them say, yes, we need to do something about it. We need to address it. 25%, only 25% are saying they're thinking of doing something about it. That means we are stalled. Leadership is stalled. And we need to find a path forward. But what we've done is we haven't prepared leaders to lead in this new reality. Bill?
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was just out of curiosity, really quickly, this non sequitur moment, but my former colleagues at McKinsey will know I'm the ultimate agenda destroyer. When you were out there, were you thinking of Total Eclipse of the Heart or Black Hole Sun? Bonnie Tyler, right? I think, yeah, I have to admit, I was going a little bit more towards Black Hole Sun with the clouds. Right? But okay, it entertains only me, but I felt like I needed to ask. Look, when we started doing this, just a quick shout out to my former colleagues at McKinsey. The people who were on earlier, Brian Hancock and Emily, they were my co-authors on Power to the Middle. The front end of Power to the Middle was originally going to be a lot of this, the how did we get here kind of stuff. And then our wonderful editors at Harvard suggested, Bill, I realize you like history, but not everybody else does. Maybe separate that out. And Christie was already working on this stuff, and we figured out, hey, why not us? I mean, we actually have advanced degrees in this stuff, and we spent 25 to 30 years consulting people on how to run the place.
Each,
maybe it's
by
worthwhile.
The way.
All right, again with
Sorry.
the age stuff. Thank you. I thought we had eliminated that in warm-ups.
Just saying. I am older than you, though.
I know. I just won't tell anyone ever because we don't look it. So here's the thing. I'm going to run through a few things for you and going at eras, broadly speaking. 80s to 2000, which was Y2K, right? we had a run up there. You can bookend that, then to the financial crisis, then financial crisis to COVID. What was common and still true through all of that was we were always looking for a silver bullet. What's the new way to organize? Structure. Hold on, let me bring this with me. Structure, or design. What's the new way to get talent? And then what's the new way for leaders to be or behave or be seen? So we'll run through that really quickly. The conceit in all of that is around power. The company had the power because people still went to the company. Small number of opportunities, always a sense of scarcity, and so you had to go to them. The thing that's really blown up on this was the 2.5 to 3 year run that we had through great attrition, great attraction, and COVID, where you didn't have to go to work to do work. You had more opportunities you could shake a stick at. You decided that if it doesn't work for me, it doesn't work, and people started going out on their own. So we're not saying that these fads didn't have a kernel of truth in them. In fact, most of them, my encouragement is when I rattle something off, think about whether or not it was ever actually based on something. Most of the time it was, right? There was good science on it. But it's when it becomes religion, when it gets picked up by Axios, or it shows up in Business Week, or nothing wrong with Axios, by the way. But like if TMZ or someone else is covering it, it's probably left the world of science and gone into the world of pop culture. And then it's almost certainly being misapplied. So what we're trying to say is we've allowed our management thinking and theory around how we organize the place, how we fill those boxes with the talent we need, and then how we lead it. It's become pop culture, not actually fit for purpose for what we need. Obviously, there was tremendous, tremendous suffering because of COVID. But if you go to say the conceit of the beauty of COVID, well, it's like one of these discontinuity lines where like all that old stuff just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. We're like literally faced with people going, I'm not coming to the office and I don't care. And no, you are going to treat me as an equal. Just because in a hierarchy you're here, you're not better than me. It's like when the little kid says to you, you're not the boss of me. It's like that. So anyway, that's the treatise here, okay? Which is, how do we now then change the footing of these people that we desperately need to lead better and get beyond the trope and beyond the nonsense? I mean, let's be honest, just those of you who are engineers, Lean and Six are actually incredibly different. One's batch work, one's continuous work, and somewhere somebody in a consultancy somewhere said, let's call it Lean Six and just tell everyone to do it. I'm gonna get my former colleague there, he used to build airplanes. And he's very clear on the difference between Lean and Six and when they should be applied. And we would regularly go into clients and they would say things like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. The people from the center who do Lean, they come out and do that for us. We might be missing the point. Okay, so that's the essence of all this. Now, I burned through too much time. I'm going to go fast. But I wanted you to know why we thought it was so important to challenge the nonsense we've been fed. Because for those of us in our 50s or, say, early 60s, we probably have one last
I'm
crack.
not there yet.
Okay,
Thank
just throwing
you.
it out there.
Whew.
We probably have one last crack at getting this right. And the people we'd be handing it over to have not been trained to do this.
Right.
Not at all. So there is a sense of urgency, at least for me anyway. I feel like I've got, modern for me represents my last chapter. And I think we gotta reset the bar on what it means to lead. Okay, running through. I'll click through these just so we get them. First one, we're looking here. Just if you look at the things that we've experienced, those of you in your 50s will remember that Gordon Gekko was held up as supposed to be Oliver Stone's anti-hero. And by and large, greed is good was propagated as a rallying cry for Americans, right? This idea that greed is good, trickle-down economics. So this starting, anyone leading currently was born in an era of excess and trickle-down and stepping on someone's throat on the way was okay. And that's where they started. Then we went into mass globalization, where a huge portion of the West realized if we were chasing the arbitrage of labor, your job was not safe, there was no loyalty, and it was going to the lowest common denominator in terms of an hourly wage. Then certainly we got the run-up of going, hold on, that analog stuff doesn't matter anymore. Right. Particularly once we were like dealing with 28.8 and 56.6 modems and you're dialing up to here, you got mail. Right? It was like, oh my God, now I don't need all these people to read my memo. I can just send an email to all of them. So transaction costs tank, but at the same time you have people wondering and scurrying, do I have a job? What is my place here? How does my company or my country even stand in the world order? So right at the period, right in 2000, and then we were hit with what? All of us, we were laughing out there. All of us thought that the banks were going to close, the money was going to go away, the clocks were going to stop working, and oh my God, would the nukes be here in the morning? Or Y2K. So the people currently in charge have had these periods that were disorienting. Obviously, then we had the run through the aughts, punctuated by the financial crisis, where everyone went back to thinking almost 80 years earlier, Is our money safe? Do I have anything that I thought I have? Then we run the COVID, and instantly it's turned upside down, and we had people going, it's not just livelihoods, kids, it's lives, and we're actually really scared. And now what do we do? Okay, so with that as a backdrop of saying, haven't we all had enough trauma? It's a joke for those of you who count ACEs scores. I think I worked my way through those. Okay, there we go. See, somebody got the ACEs score coming. All right, how do we approach design? I'm gonna bring this over to me right here. How do we approach design? In the 80s, we had the Matrix. Who here loves having more than one boss? Seemed like such a good idea, right? What could possibly go wrong? Why did we have double lines? Because somewhere we decided that we couldn't trust people to collaborate, we needed to formally line it. Or how about the flattened organizations? With all due respect to anyone here from BCG, 6x6 was a bunch of crap. It was made up. It was made up to sell. The belief that said, oh, if the CEO gets closer to the front line, that's going to make them better leaders. No, they still didn't know who they were because it was too wide.
Well, it also gave the impression to employees that they could have a voice in a flattened organization, that they could engage in decision-making, they could engage in the active pursuit of the strategy, and they couldn't. So that was a huge falsehood that started to lean toward the questioning of the employee groups of leadership in particular.
I mean, look, it's not to say that there weren't spans in the leftover era from the Sloan model of the replicable BUs that weren't too narrow. But if you had spans that were too narrow, often it was because people were trying to find a way to pay individual contributors out of the point system, pay them what they were worth, give them a few people and call it, and then you get the stovepipe. There's ways to address structure that are legitimately about is an economy skill, scale, or scope. Yep. It's not about this. Okay, so then we go to, hey, let's do the flexible thing. Who here loved the idea when they first heard agile ways of working? Deploy, redeploy, be quick, right? That seemed to make sense. Did you ever consider that would be turning the organization on its side, using lexicon that you don't understand, like guilds and families and I don't know what else they were, chapters and whatever? Did you think that you had to adopt all that to go, I'd like something I can count on, I'd like to work on something new, then come back and redeploy? Listen, this thing, when you use structure, we've convinced people that the first thing you do as a new leader, walk around for 60 to 90 days, take count of who you're keeping, who you're firing, and the first thing you do is change the boxes just to show you're in charge. That is a power play.
Well, and the reality is agility in this environment, which is why leadership becomes so critical, agility doesn't cut it anymore. We're having to move at a speed of decision-making and critical decision-making, and we have a system of ecosystem partners that we have to rely on in that decision-making, that agile is almost archaic at this point.
Okay, I'm skipping ahead to talent. Now you have all those boxes, right? Now, all right, now how would we fill them? Well, certainly, so anyone who graduated like in the mid to late 80s, early 90s, that would have been at the height of, hey, we need you to know something about something. What's the competence? And then HR would go off and spend 3 years building a global competency model. Right? Some of you are checking because we're like still doing different versions of today. Is it a taxonomy? Is it an ontology? Is it global skills? Is it micro skills? Is it a core competence or merely something you like to do? We might have just overcooked it a little bit. Just saying. Or, okay, and that's about what people can do. Or you get into the 90s, propagated by, listen, my former colleagues, one of whom, Beth Axelrod, is an amazingly talented woman. Right, a good leader, but her and Ed Michaels and Helen Hanfield-Jones were for talent. And while I buy the idea of scarce talent, I'm not sure that fixating solely on the A talent was ever going to get us where we needed to go. I mean, let's just say all of you, because you're here and you're incredibly bright, are Mensa members. By definition, half of you in this room are below average. That's the reality in any distribution, right? That fixation on A talent, you recruit all A players from the best schools, I'll show you a group of people who've never been told they're not good enough. Yep. And they're going to lose their mind the first time you give them critical feedback. We last night at our dinner had a wonderful story from a law firm who said the intern, upon coming back, received their offer and submitted a response to that offer suggesting that that intern be hired in immediately as a partner. Not kidding, can't make it up. Okay, so what do? We had the war for talent. Then we got to employee experience. Not a terrible thing to do. Well, whether it was great places for work, which had just a hint of all big companies are bad, or the work at Gallup or the work at McKinsey on organizational health, there's an underlying current there of we, the people in the power, will engage you, the people out of power. again, the conceit of the concentration of power in the company or the leaders versus those out here.
Well, and the question that we have asked time and time again as employers or as leaders is, what do we require of the people that are coming in our doors? What do they need to have and what do we get for it, right? That question today has been fundamentally turned on its head. And employees and prospective employees are saying, well, no, what do I require of my leader in order to be a part of this organization? And that shifts the power dynamic to rather one way than two way. And building that value proposition around that is now what we think about. How do we think about employer brand? How do we think about the experience that we give employees? Because the experience that we give employees has to match the experience that we have for our customers. Because if our insides aren't going to match our outsides, we are in very big trouble. And we will be exposed by employees, be it on social media or be it through Fishbowl and things like that. There is greater brand risk of individuals as well as large companies because of not understanding this two-way street and this engagement and requirements, that the requirements go both ways.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was thinking, 2 years ago, Brooke and I were here talking about social capital, and there was a big portion of it of like, how is it wired, and do you invest in it, differences in people who invest. And I remember thinking then there was something about knowing what we know and knowing who we are that really mattered, but also just a real deficit of like, we're kind of leaving it to the employees. Mm-hmm. And only the truly skilled leaders actually figured out that being the hoarder of the relationships was the mistake. It was actually plugging these people together. But that was like, a few people who kind of get it, talk about it. It wasn't like we were expecting that or demanding it, right? Yeah. The last one here is skills economy. And Christie, given her experience, at Deloitte and Accenture, and most notably at Apple, this idea of the skills economy I've always felt one of two ways about it. I like the idea of removing unnecessary KSAE requirements for hiring, knowledge, skills, attributes, experience. I love that from an equitable access to opportunity standpoint. But I was always a little afraid that where did identity and belonging and attachment to pride in a role come from? Yeah. And I think it's one of the things we haven't necessarily cracked yet.
Well, it comes from community. It comes from connection. And those are two things that we're sorely lacking today. And it's hard to figure out, especially in distributed workplace model. But again, it comes down to the leader.
Yeah, for sure. I was just thinking about this idea of the community and sort of what you'd hope to foster as opposed to one from power versus just one from just enthusiasm for seeing people. Obviously Christie and I just both joined Modern 6-7 months ago in this idea of building a very different kind of firm. I can assure you though, when I arrived here and I saw colleagues that I've had for around 20 years, my enthusiasm was seeing my former McKinsey colleagues, right? It's and you're reminded of, at some point, your belief in that the institution is in the people and the relationships you have. I think, as a non sequitur here, we should not dismiss the impact of COVID and people being separated from the relationships that they'd had for a long period of time. So whether it's your newest joiners and their high school or their college was separated, and now we have them working remote, or longtime joiners who actually the reason they were there, the energy they got was these people. I think it puts a double burden on the leader to figure out how to do this mesh work, right? And purposely take time to do it. Sorry, just a quick non-aside, but I think what a big deal, right? Yeah. We're still bemoaning.
No question.
We're still bemoaning the idea of retention. Well, you know what? If you don't want to mandate people to come back to work, make work a place people want to come back to. I mean, Jesus, right? It's not, the memo demanding it's not going to get it done. Don't have them working for jerks and make it okay. Sorry, for those of you who've listened to McKinsey Talks Talent, there's which Brooke has replaced me and no longer does these rants, but I was good for a rant once a session. Okay, how about what we demand of leaders? I mean, in the 80s and early 90s, at some point, didn't you just get sick of hearing what Jack Welch was doing? When I first joined McKinsey, and I would answer questions, go, what's the best practice from GE? I go, funny enough, there's some things going on at GE that probably aren't great. I couldn't talk about it because in my PhD program, my chair's chair was Steve Kerr, who built Crotonville. I'd done a whole bunch of forensic interviews and people left. I'm like, it's not that great. But we couldn't talk about it. We like the hero. Silver bullet time. All we have to do is copy Bossity, copy Jobs, copy Jack Welch. Even last night, when we were talking about, right, there's a little bit of we're willing to whitewash a lot of crappy behavior because we like the outcome. Yep. To this day, performance reviews are undermined because we will look past crappy people for good results. And that's just sorry. You want to know why these things are falling apart and people don't want to be with you? It's because you have them working for jerks. And then you excuse it for it. So next one, situational leadership. There's where we said, hey, there's not just one style. We're going to use the wealthy white guy metaphor of golf, where you can go out and play and spend your time on the course and choose which club you're going to use. I'm like, it's not. It's like, come on, man. How about situational awareness? That's really what we're talking about. Know the person you're talking to. Don't just wait your turn to speak. Bother to know what they need. That's the context. It's not just, oh, I'm going into this, and this is going to be where I fire people, so I probably shouldn't do it over VC. Mm-hmm. Not that we know anyone who did that.
No.
Inclusive leadership. You know, when we finally started figuring out, hey, it would be great if people felt like they belonged. It took us to after the financial crisis to figure that one out. Unless, of course, we were still looking for the right poster and the right tagline on our website and the right thing to hashtag, and then it becomes performative. I mean, look, I'm being a little bit salty because how much of stuff that should be based on good science and a fundamental knowledge of the human condition at work, how we allowed to become advertising and taglines and a Twitter line. People for how many years have had to go to work and think, well, I can't really talk about my family. Oh, because my family is the same gender as me, right? Or I have to hide the fact that I have a disability. Or I don't want to acknowledge that I go to my AA meeting and I can't work till 10 o'clock. Like that kind of stuff, it's corrosive. And I feel like if we don't avoid the performative and we actually demand leaders embrace the outward, it's not going to work. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to give an example. I can remember when I was a former employer of a big tech company. But I remember going into, in terms of inclusive leadership and in terms of being a more human leader, going into a meeting, and the leader of this group sat everybody down, had the agenda, and started ripping through the agenda. The weekend before was the mass murder in Florida of all those kids at the school. And this was a Monday morning. And he went in and he just ripped through it. And I could see on the faces of the people sitting in that room how disconnected they were. And so he pulled me aside. It was not a very effective meeting. People were kind of muted in their responses of driving the agenda. And he came to me and he said, you know, Christie, there was something off in there. What do you think? I said, have you ever thought about starting one of your meetings with, how are you? Simple question, how are you? I have teenage kids, and I just can't walk past what happened this past weekend. Yeah. And he looked at me, you know, like, well, I never thought about that. And so we ran an experiment, very non-culture-ish for this company. But he ran an experiment in the last next couple of weeks. He started with, how are you? And his colleagues around the table, when he did it the first time, looked at him like, are you okay? Have you been drinking? What's happening here? Like, and so they were a little shocked. But long and short of it is, he kept doing it. And what he found was that people felt they had permission to talk about what was blocking them from being fully engaged in the work that they needed to get done. Yeah. And that, in essence, they became much more productive and engaged with each other with a simple understanding and a simple question of, how are you?
You know, it's interesting when you're asking leaders to do things that are unnatural for them. Sometimes just signposting and saying, I'm not really sure. I feel like I need to do this, but I'm not really sure. Right. I don't have a good answer. I happen to be looking at Katie. One of our colleagues, Carter Wood, at the time, there was a very difficult partner and senior partner call after Ferguson. And our colleague got up there and goes, I don't even know the first thing about the experience here. I just know it matters. And I know tomorrow we've got to be able to show up for associates differently. Mm-hmm. And it was just so, it had started from a place of humility and acknowledging that we need to do something even if we're imperfect. And I just wonder, in the world of chasing the silver bullet and chasing the hashtag, have we lost the part of starting with going, well, actually, those of you from Microsoft will know this guy. Nate Boaz used to say this all the time. Have the humility to know you're not good enough and the courage to do something about it. Yeah. And I wonder if we've made it like not okay to acknowledge that. right? And we grow it. Let's
Yep.
skip ahead because Christie's got
So,
closing time here.
You know, clearly, you know, we've all been talking about the statistics and the weight that this plays on our economy and on human beings, right? This is costing us $8.8 trillion. Disengaged employees is costing us $8.8 trillion in the world, globally. That's a lot of money. 25% of people say that their leaders are disengaged. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about how some younger workers are turning to AI for direction in their companies rather than their managers or their leaders because they're not getting time with their leaders. Certainly 80% of CEOs know what's expected of them, but they don't have any idea on how to act on it. So there is a complete void of humanity within our organizations that we must tap into. And that comes from senior leadership, and we simply have to shift how we do that. So let's talk a little bit about what is needed. Oh, sorry,
That's
thanks,
all right.
that's me.
I'm going to click my own slides.
Yeah,
There we
go
go.
ahead.
It's a new phenomenon for me.
Yeah, no, this is my slide.
Is it?
So,
There we go. This is Christie's slide. We're just skipping through right now.
Thanks. So clearly we've talked about, you know, we've been admiring the problem this entire talk, right? And we've been taking this historical
We do have
approach.
a breakout right after this.
Yes. An underinvestment in leadership is clear. The wrong people have been moving up the ladder. Those individual performers who have done really, really well, we put in leadership positions and we expect them to manage people and they have no idea how to do it.
Yeah.
Or those leaders have been part of an in-group and are popular, or they've been the loudest voice in the room.
Yeah.
The myth of the CEO as hero, this is what we've perpetrated, and frankly, my opinion, we need to stop, right? Because most of the heroes that we have been put on pedestals and they've not behaved very well, right? And candidly, they've been straight white men. There's increasing rates of employee disengagement, which we have talked over and over and over again that we need to address. Now it's your turn.
All right. Last one.
It's not the last one, but
It's
go
the
ahead.
second. Let's skip ahead one. Okay, here we go.
I got you, Bill.
Here's the thing. And you can say we're at 2 minutes, and I want to make sure we have 30 seconds. How many of you right now have people in your organization in leadership roles who you know are not up to it? Okay, once you know, you can't unknow it. That means you now have to deal with the dissonance growing in your head. That you, on one hand, will say, financial capital hasn't been the gating capital in a long time. Most of us have access to more than enough money. Human capital is. And you've been subjecting the people that you say are precious to lousy leadership, or at a minimum, undeveloped leadership. I don't know how you continue to deal with that and not do something about it. We're not talking just about a quick course that's online. It's about actually demanding that you insist that leaders understand all the old stuff is a different set of rules. And I realize that sounds like now more than ever. Yeah, no kidding. But you know what? We didn't have 3 decades of tumult, 3 decades of underinvestment, 3 decades of sea change, and finally culminating with something, the blow up of work as we know it. So yeah, it is kind of different. And you get to say, hey, what do we actually need in leadership? What if the basic requirements of the task are different than leading the organization? Why did we force them to be together anyway? They're just different.
Yeah.
How do you redefine what a job is? I do think there's something here in terms of we allowed the regulatory environment, particularly in the Western world, Western Europe and the United States, to define the construct of job analysis, selection, appraisal, differentiation, largely a regulatory choice. But we don't have to follow that. We can do something different. And then maybe the last one, what would we say if we said no more individual iconic heroes? How about a collection of people who are heroic for running the place differently? Now, we really didn't go in much to what you do about it because we know we had a breakout. But this is the point. We really think this idea of modern organizations, by the way, we're playing on modern right now. Modern organizations are made up of modern teams in terms of the work they do and how they work together, led by modern leaders.
Yep.
But the word modern with the capital M and the little m, it should be okay to say we need something different. And we don't have to rely on Business Week, Forbes, Fortune, New York Times, all that to tell us what the fad is, because the silver bullets do not work. They haven't served us well. 7 seconds.
One question?
quite a bit of keynoting. And I realized I have been quoting you from the platform. And in meeting you, it dawned on me, and then looking at your bio. At one point, you said in the next 10 years, the most sought-after leadership skill will be empathy. And
Yep.
I want to pull a thread from yesterday.
Yep.
And I want to hear your perspective on empathy as a skill, what it is and what it isn't, and why you see it to be one of the most important skills, especially as we think about the rate of change, pace, and evolution.
Yeah, I think that, I think a couple of things. We are moving from an era of emotional intelligence isn't good enough. We need to move into emotional maturity. And emotional maturity is really about the suspension of self-interest. It's insatiable curiosity, like we talked about yesterday. It's understanding the context of our employees, each one of them. And in order to do those things, we have to grow the muscle of pure understanding, right? We have to become so inquisitive with our employees to understand that if we physically never learned how to be empathetic, we've learned how to ask questions. We've learned to ask, tell me your story, right? We did this great thing at Apple when I was there with this program called You in 6 Words, right? And it's define yourself in 6 words. And my definition of my 6 words was, I'm the youngest of 8. It said nothing about, very vocally, I mean, I'm out there as, openly gay, I'm a woman, all of these things, and people know those about me. But if my 6 words was, oh, yeah, I'm gay, that doesn't define who I am. What defines who I am is I'm the youngest of 8. What that created was a conversation. People leaned into, you are? How many boys, how many girls? Oh, you must be Catholic. Where'd you grow up? What's it? All of these things that immediately created bridging capital, right? To me, that is an example of empathy. When we desire, really suspend self-interest and have this incredible desire to understand the person who's sitting across from us, and taking the time to do that without our watches buzzing, without our devices next to us, but fully focused. That, to me, is the greatest act of empathy we can have, and we've lost it.
Wow. That was great. That was really great. When I first met Christie, we happened to be talking about empathy, and I had read, and then, well, actually, Brooke and Brian Hancock just had this professor on McKinsey Talks Talent on the idea of empathy showing up as you feel it, right? The emotional contagion versus you try to identify it and problem solve it, or sometimes you just want to show that you acknowledge it. And I wonder, when Walter was talking yesterday, I thought it was a little bit of a throwaway, honestly, about I think empathy.
I disagreed with it.
Right? I'm like, I don't know. I think maybe you don't need the emotional contagion, but you ought to at least acknowledge what's going on.
Yeah.
It may be I don't have to be pulled into everything, but to sit and do that, it's like I don't see you, right? So there we go.
Hey, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.